Let me, since Manny is recording this, let me introduce our visitors again. And we've invited each of them to give a couple remarks about their service in the war. So I'll start with Mr. Ray Pegram, who is a radio operator aboard C-47s. Don Clark flew C-47s. And George Shenkle over here decided he wanted to jump from a perfectly good airplane several times. But George is was a member of the 82nd Airborne Division and jumped into history from this very plane on D-Day. So let me begin with Ray. Ray, if you tell us about your service, please.
Well, I went in January after Pearl Harbor. I stayed home for Christmas and New Year's, and I didn't want to go into infantry, and I wanted in the Air Corps. So I went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, which was the nearest Air Corps recruiting station on January 2nd. And took all the exams, passed everything to go to pilot school, except my left eye was too nearsighted. So they told me I could be a flying radio operator or a flight engineer, and I told them whichever school would open first, that's what I'd be. So that's why I wound up in radio. And I was the radio operator on the squadron commander's plane. He was Major Mann from Scottsbluff, Nebraska. I had a fine crew. Harold Newsom was my crew chief in Texas. And we participated. We went to England in October 1943. We were the first troop-carrier group to arrive in England. And we trained more in England and then ready for D-Day. We were in D-Day, dropped to 101st Airborne. I made 3 parachute drops and 3 glider tows on D-Day. Well, the 3rd glider tow was actually on the 7th. But we made 3 parachute drops and 2 glider tows all on the 6th. And then they let us go to bed. I was also in the Holland invasion. We dropped 101st Airborne into Holland. We made 2 drops, 1 day apart. And then we made about 8 or 9 supply drops after that. And then we, between those 2 missions, we carried a lot of gasoline to France. As Patton drove across France, he needed a lot of gasoline for his tanks. So we would land in cow pastures, fields, anywhere they figured one was firm enough for the C-47 to sit down, and they were easily flown, as I can tell you that. So we did a lot of that. And then we also dropped the 17th Airborne across the Rhine because the 101st had been beat up in Bastogne, and we dropped supplies into Bastogne. The weather was bad, but I can't remember where it cleared up, the day before Christmas or Christmas Day, but that was the first day of clear weather that we could drop supplies to Bastogne. And we made 1 parachute drop across the line, and we lost 1 plane in that drop, but my plane went all of those missions and never got scratched. So basically that's my story. Well, we did liberate our POWs from Germany after the war was over, and our group flew into Germany and loaded them up for several days. We made many trips flying liberated POWs back to Paris, where they were handled from then by Air Transport Command or by boat, whichever they needed to use. So I guess basically that's it. Any questions I can try to answer. Incidentally, we were flying the 101st down to Nice, France after Bastogne for R&R, and every time we'd go down, we'd spend the night, which was a good thing for us. And I happened to be down there the night the war ended in Europe, and that was some wild night.
Ray, what's your biggest recollection of the D-Day drop?
Well, we were in the first echelon of dropping the Pathfinders. Colonel Crouch, I think, was leading the mission, and not sure, Major Man. We were in the lead second element, and we dropped the Pathfinders at about 10 minutes after midnight, and it was pretty rough. A lot of fog and a lot of flak. And then we went back and we made 2 more drops on the 101st, and then we made 2 glider tows. It was getting daylight by then. We could carry 2 American gliders and 1 Horsa. We carried American gliders both times. And then we made another glider tow on the 7th. And after that, we did evacuation flights. We brought in ammunition, landed on Omaha Beach with the tide out. The sand was very firm. We landed on the beach. The engineers put down some metal strips for us where we taxied and unloaded, and we put up the litters and brought out wounded. We made about 8 or 10 of those trips. You've seen maybe written up about 2 P-38s escorting us to Harlem invasion. And one book I read said both pilots were shot down, but the one I witnessed was there were 2 P-38s escorting us, and we were heading for a gun emplacement, a German gun emplacement, and the first one peeled off and dropped his bombs straight down at it, but they shot him, and he turned up the plane straight up and bailed out. I watched him float down. I'm sure he was catching, but the other P-38 finished the job and knocked out the gun emplacement. So I'm sure they saved lots of lives, but I didn't know that second P-38 was hit, because the last time I saw it, it was flying around Broadway.
Well, folks, thanks very much for attending, and thanks to our veterans.
Thanks, Bruce.
George.
Okay, thanks for coming.
The major, there were 3 planes from my squadron that were in that first group. And I think we were probably, I'm not sure where in the element we were, but there were 6 planes in 3 different drops. 6 planes,
right, for
6
the
planes, 6
Pathfinders.
planes. That's right. And we were in the first element.
Okay, and they actually used the G to navigate overland to get to the TC, because the Rebecca didn't have a Eureka on the ground, so they couldn't use Rebecca.
Well, so we were just following Colonel Crouch.
Okay.
And he was to find the
But if you
DC.
had to, you could have taken over.
Yes, because we had the navigator.
Okay.
Yeah, we hit a lot of fog, and then we hit a lot of flak. And the flak was really popping when we dropped it. I remember looking at my watch, and it's somewhere around 10 after 12.
Do you remember by any chance what DZ your Pathfinder was going into?
Seemed to me like there was 7, I'm not sure.
101st. Okay, so you were
Close to the St. Mary's.
You were north of where this aircraft, when it flew its mission.
Yeah, we were in the north section.
This aircraft flew to DZN.
Yeah, he was dropping the 82nd.
Yes, right.
Yes,
the
right.
508.
Right, yeah.
That book right there is who they were dropping.
Right. Yeah, they were south,
Yes.
east of us.
And the problem with the Pathfinder for this particular group is they never got the Eureka working for the 2nd Battalion, and therefore they couldn't use the Rebecca for the 2nd Battalion. The 1st and 3rd, yeah, they did get it work, but they had a good drop.
Yeah. Well, you know, they were all scattered.
Yes.
And it
Right.
turned out to kind of be a blessing in disguise. But we decided, I wasn't in on the decision, but it was decided we'd never do another night drop. And that's
Can I
why,
get you to sign
Holland
my-
was all daylight.
Can I get you to sign my book for me? Just
Okay.
Now, what book is that? Can I see the cover on that?
Put us down in hell. It's about
Could
the
you turn it a little
50.
bit more so I can see it?
I can't turn my hand anymore. You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
And who's the author of that?
Pardon?
Who's the author?
Phil Nordyke.
Phil
Nordyke.
Nordyke.
It's the combat history of the 508th Parachute.
It's a good book. If you'll sign right there, sir, I sure would appreciate it because it's been a pleasure meeting you. You are the second person that we've run into now who has experience on the Rebecca, who has seen Rebecca and knows what it is.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, I didn't, since we had a navigator, I never operated it, but it's set
But you know, what it was and where it was sitting.
Come on
Yeah.
out if you would. We want to get a picture of you and the other two World War II veterans. Then we're going to come out of the airplane.
Okay, sure will. Thank you.
Delaware State.
You got him now?
I got 'em. We're going to ask you to come back and sit down here.
Like I say, sit down here.
No, all the way down there. Next to Eileen. All right, we're going to get one picture with you in it, Eileen. Have a seat. And then, Eileen, you need to get up.
Okay.
Whatever.
I've got some
Okay,
pictures
well, whatever.
in the bag outside. Yeah.
Now, who do we have here in the front of the line? Is that who? George Shenkle?
Yes.
George, where do you live these days?
Where do I live?
Pennsylvania.
Shenkle Manor,
Lansdale,
Lansdale, Pennsylvania.
And the gentleman right there? Your name, sir?
Clark.
Clark?
Don Clark.
Don Clark. Nice to meet you, sir. And you were in the U.S. Army Air Corps, correct?
Pilot. He was a pilot.
A
I was a
pilot?
pilot of one of these.
What was your rank when you...
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant. And you flew a C-47? Thank you very much. And we have Eileen here, huh?
Hi.
Okay,
I'm here to
Eileen, where are
honor-
you from? You brought George Shenkle with
I
you.
brought Georgia with me today. I'm here to honor all these veterans for their service, which I greatly appreciate. And I'm from Pennsylvania.
Very nice. And who's that handsome man sitting next to her? Sir?
I'm Ray Pegram,
Hi, Ray. Where are you from?
Spindale, North Carolina.
And tell me a little bit about what you did in the war.
I was a radio operator on the squadron commander's plane. He was Major Mann from Scottsbluff, Nebraska.
Okay.
And I was on his plane for D-Day, Holland, and across the Rhine, and many supply of gasoline and other things to Patton's army as he crossed France. And we evacuated our POWs from Germany after the war was over. Then we came back home and landed in Savannah, Georgia on July 4th, I believe it was.
Well, I look forward to hearing what you have to say outside. And thank you for coming today, all of you.
Okay, well, thanks for having us.
Well, Ray, if you'll scoot over.
We're not done with you yet.
We want,
Whatever.
I think the public affairs fellow wants to get some pictures.
Okay,
Everybody look this way, please.
yes.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, fellas, let's exit the airplane.
Okay.
So this hangar was here in the war, and it was a secret facility, and it's where they developed the. They bring a fighter in like a P-38 and figure out how do we hang a 5-inch rocket off this airplane, and they did all the engineering. They fabricated the brackets, all the electrical work, all the sighting for all of the fighters that fired those 5-inch rockets. And so it was a secret facility.
All the two P-38s saved a lot of lives on the Holland first trip in. One of them got shot down. I watched him turn the nose up and bailed out. We watched him float down.
Very cool.
He knocked out a gun in place with that we were headed right to.
No kidding.
Last 2 days, it
Saved
was
a
80
lot of
degrees
lives.
here.
Awesome. Man.
I've seen it written up in books,
Yeah.
but I witnessed that one.
Well, here's our ramp, and in front of us, the Air Mobility Command honors both the transport airplanes, but the tanker airplanes as well. So right in front of you, you see a KC-135, which is a tanker,
Right.
and to the left front is the C-5. It's a C-5A. Came into service in '69, and it's the only C-5 in a museum right now. We got that about a year and a half ago.
Amazing how they do this.
And
Refueling it in the air.
when that airplane came here, it was painted gray, and it's since been painted white over gray. And I'm told it was all done but with rollers because they couldn't spray for fear of overspray and EPA kind of things. So this is our C-5, and you see a missile over there, that white missile.
Yeah.
This airplane actually dropped a live ICBM, a Minuteman missile, back in '74. And they put it on a sled kind of thing and pulled it out the back under a parachute.
You pulled it out.
Yep. And then once it's steadied in the vertical position, they blew off the parachute, pushed a button, and the missile actually flew downrange. And so that's why we have this mock-up of a missile here. This is the airplane that did that. You can see it on YouTube, and I'll tell you, it was a pretty wild thing. All right, ready?
I tell you what, look at those wheels. They score a lot of weight when this thing hits the
They
ground.
do. I helped change those things. They're all filled with gel.
What's this?
They're filled with gel,
What, the
tires.
The
So
gel.
they'll never go flat anymore. But that also means they weigh about 1,000 pounds now.
Why does he have that to automobile tires? I mean, the cost is nothing, but to never go flat.
Never go flat. Oh, you probably pay through the nose for it, but
Well, hey, people have money nowadays. What's money?
one of the airplanes that was considered as the major transport plane in World War II. The C-47 won out.
One out, yeah.
Oh,
But
yeah.
they made about 400 of those things, the C-60, and that came to us just last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad the C-47 won. It was the safest plane they ever
Yep.
built.
And that one's rigged for executive transport, so you can see the windows and the curtains and such.
Yeah.
The other airplane you see on the left is KC-97, a tanker. Here's the one at your 10 o'clock position is a KC-124, that big old, they used to call it Old Shaky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were going to get C-110s, I think, in alliance to invade Japan.
Uh-huh.
And I never got sent out there. I was lucky. They'd misplaced me and four other fellows misplaced our personnel records when we went off furlough back to Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Right.
And they wouldn't ship us out there till they found them.
Mhm.
And so the war ended while I was sitting up there, so I got out September 2nd.
Yeah.
My friends were all out in Alliance, Nebraska with those airplanes, and they were in 6 months later because they couldn't go leave the equipment.
Well, my dad's unit ended a war in Austria. Of course, they were on orders for Japan, so they were real happy to learn that the war had ended.
Oh yeah, they had already told us we'd have
It's in
60%
the office.
casualties.
Yeah, at least. All right, as soon as Zach is on, let's. The big airplane in front of us is a KC-133. It looks like a big old C-130, but that one was designed to carry the Minuteman missiles from the factory out to the launch sites in North Dakota and places like that. This big old thing. I think they only made about 50 of these.
Just roll to the ground. Isn't it?
Yeah, it is too. There's a C-54, which was
Yeah, we
Ray.
saw-
You're probably familiar with
saw
those.
some of those.
Yep, yep. The camouflage one at your 9 o'clock is a C-7A Caribou, and that's a short takeoff and landing airplane made in Canada, but it was very popular and very useful in Vietnam because it supplied the special forces camps and such. So they had very small, unimproved runways.
Is that a prop jet engine?
No,
Just
no,
a
it's not a
regular
turbo,
engine?
just a regular radial engine. And I've jumped those a couple times up at Fort Bragg. This airplane, this two-engine, is C-21? C-31, another transport.
Don't want to hear any more blonde.
Now the
What
pretty
number
one
is
up here,
this?
the blue over white, or the white over blue,
One.
that's an Air Force Two,
That was two.
because that airplane used to fly the Vice President.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay,
it's
it's the
called-
vice president plane.
Its call sign was Air Force Two when the Vice President was aboard. And as you can imagine, it's all rigged out as a distinguished visitor and VIP airplane. Now, directly to our front, you see two 141s, C-141s. The white over gray is an alpha model, and the camouflage one is a B model. The difference of the two is the camouflage model has been extended, its hull has been extended 27 feet. And the way they did that is they cut the fuselage and put plugs in. And so the camouflage airplane is 27 feet longer than that one. Plus, you see a hump over the over the cockpit. That's an aerial refueling.
Okay.
Oh yeah?
So that airplane can fly around the world, and it's only limited by the duration of the crew.
Right.
That's an operation, that refueling operation is really thrilling to
I've
watch.
done it twice.
Yeah?
At night and in the daylight, and it's
At night?
yeah. Let me tell you, it is an act of faith.
I know.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
So that's the 141 Bravo. Now these civilian jets you see across the fence there. At your 1 o'clock position, you see some beige buildings with a black roof. That's the Armed Forces mortuary. So when our casualties come back to Dover,
The bucket bags.
that's where they go.
Yeah.
These aircraft take the remains back to their home station.
Ah.
Their contract airplanes. Now this plane at your 11 o'clock position, this weird green looking thing, is a Soviet AN-2.
Oh yeah?
This biplane. It is still in operation. It's a 1950s vintage, but it's still in operation in places like North Korea, where they will use it to infiltrate their special forces into South Korea if war ever resumes on the Korean Peninsula. Now, why is it here? Well, it's an example of another country's airlift or airlifters. And so it is low and slow, and it's a perfect jump platform. It's still used around the world in civilian for crop dusting. In fact, when it came here, it was rigged tubing and such for crop dusting. Now at your 9 o'clock, you see another jet, white over gray. That's a C-9 Nightingale, which is a medical evacuation, which is always rigged for medical evacuation. You had to rig it, your C-47, depending on the mission. But that airplane's mission is medevac. Right. And it's got assigned medics and nurses and flight nurses and so forth for whatever the mission might be. Now, if you look far to your 9 o'clock, you see a control tower.
Yeah.
That's the old Dover Air Force Base control tower. That some years ago, when they built the new one, the museum asked if they could have the what they call the head, where the air traffic guys actually sit. And so they built about a 40-foot pedestal, and they put that on it, and we can go up and tell people how air traffic controllers do their thing. Here's the modern. I say modern, but the C-130 is today's C-47.
Right.
Although it's not so modern because the first one came into the system in 1954.
That's right, a long time ago.
And is still flying.
Yeah.
And will fly forever.
Yeah.
And so those of us from Fort Bragg know C-130s real well. We know the back end real well.
You know, they were some of them flying in France when I was there last year.
Yeah, sure.
And they, the C-130s and 24s both on paratroopers.
Yeah. So this one, in fact, this one is marked Pope Air Force Base, which is now Pope Army Airfield. It's no longer an Air Force Base.
I was stationed there in the beginning of my Army career.
Okay.
And they found out I had typing in high school, so they put me to running the shuttle types and operating the link trainers. So I never pulled guard duty or anything else.
Well, we'll have to show you the link trainer we have inside when we go back
I
in.
learned to fly the link trainer.
Okay.
And Captain Nelson let me take the C-47 off over in England one time.
Yeah.
Because I'd had that experience.
Really? I want to say that's the same type of airplane that Amelia.
Earhart.
yeah.
It was similar to that. I don't know if it's the same model or not.
Well, I looked
When was this built, do you know?
Say again?
When was this built, this plane? I'm sorry, Ray.
I don't know. I'd have to look at the
board.
The board.
It's on that board, I think.
Late 40s.
Between 39 and 45,
Okay.
and there's 4 versions.
And all the wire you see in front of the engine,
Yes.
that's our anti-bird.
And a bird.
Anti-bird.
Anti-bird. Get the birds out of there.
And all the vertical surfaces have got spikes on them to keep the birds from roosting on them and making a mess. The one behind it is a U3. That's a little 4 or 6 seater. And here's the flying boxcar, the C-119,
Oh, yeah.
from which I made my first 5 jumps in jump school.
Oh, yeah?
And you'd think that thing would shake itself apart on the runway. It was,
Well, C-110s were the first ones, I guess. and this
Okay.
one's the second one.
all right. That's the flying boxcar. And interestingly enough, the C-47 had the power racks bolted to the bottom.
Right.
This is the first airplane that was specifically designed for powered or for aerial delivery. So you can take the tail cone off the back and you could drop heavy equipment like a Jeep or a howitzer. But every cargo airplane since then, since the C-119, has got that same high wing aerial delivery capability. Push it out the back. Every one of them.
We put some supplies in Bastogne out of the door.
Right?
In addition to that, being the crew chief.
Here is the C-121, otherwise known as the Lockheed Constellation, which I have to think is perhaps the most graceful airplane ever built. And this one was used for lots of things, passenger travel, but also lots of radar and communications kinds of things. This airplane sat on top of a restaurant somewhere. Sat on top of a building, and they had a circular stairway, and this was a cocktail lounge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's get on board.
And then the airplane or the restaurant went out of business, and somehow they were able to get this thing, but they had to cut it up to get it here, and then reassemble it. So if you went under the wing, you'd see where it's bolt pieced together and such. But we're fortunate to have it because it's got that interesting history. All right, all set? This is a C-124, like I mentioned to you earlier. The tanker to our 1 o'clock is a KC-97. It's interesting because it was a B-29. The bottom of it was a B-29, and then they built a larger superstructure on top of it. Speaking of B-29s, we're in line to get what's called a KB-50, which is the first aerial tanker. It is a B-29 that was converted.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's down at MacDill Air Force Base right now. They don't want to give it up, but it should be here.
Well, Wright. Hey, Wright took our B-17 away.
Right?
Choo-choo.
Yep, shoo baby, exactly right. So fellas, what we're going to do now is go back in and we got a table set up next to the airplane. And there's some folks, for any remarks you'd like to give, people would be welcome to hear them.
Can we come back out later to go in somewhere?
Absolutely, sure.
They didn't do this tour before. This is wonderful.
I have keys to the key.
Lockheed Galaxy.
That's that big monster.
Still in operation.
This construction on your right is an expansion of the ramp in anticipation of getting other airplanes. So this is all going to be paved over.
Bob, who funds that?
The Air Force funded this.
Really?
Yeah. Mike is a pretty sharp operator in terms of being a museum director. So he's got what's called a UFR, unfinanced requirement list, and he's ready to drop it as soon as money becomes available. If the Air Force said, "Hey, we got a budget surplus, we've got a requirement," ramp, he is slamming it in. So that's how we got the money for this ramp.
Yeah.
I thought in Tennessee was the only place that they made trailers out of the back of pickup trucks.
You're gonna have to jump off and get coffee.
Yeah. Well, I come here from Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
I live down in Cleveland.
Okay. When I retired from the Army, I was recruited to Oak Ridge and lived there for 12 years.
Before I went into the Air Corps, I took an exam. I believe it was in October of 40, what would have been 41 for TVA.
Right.
And after I went into the Air Force after January 2nd, and after Pearl Harbor, I got a telegram at home. My mother sent it to me, offered me a job out at
Norris Dam or someplace?
At Oak Ridge.
Yeah, okay, sure. That's an amazing story.
But I was already gone. I believe it was $4,200 a year. That was a lot of money.
Let me draw your attention to your 3 o'clock position. You see grass-covered berms.
Right.
Those are ammo bunkers.
Okay.
If you see them out there, and sometimes there'll be a C-17 or C-5 parked out at about the 1 o'clock position. That's called a hot spot.
Yeah.
And so when an airplane's coming in loaded with ammo or going out with ammo, it's parked over there to be loaded because it's about a mile away from the hangars and the ramp and so forth.
Yeah.
Most of our C-5s and C-17s are gone because there are 2 intersecting runways here, one 2.5 miles long and the other about 2 miles long. They're being repaved. And so for about the first 8 or 9 months, all the airplanes were here because they still had a runway, but they've now hit the intersection of those 2 runways. And so the airplanes have been moved to McGuire and other places until that runway.
Done.
Yep. So you're not going to, chances are you're not going to see any airplanes.
No dead bodies coming in then, huh?
Say again?
No dead bodies coming in.
Well, one would hope not.
Huh.
We had
Body bags.
the bunkers down at the old ammo plant at Chattanooga. It's now an industrial park and a nature park, and I ride mountain bikes up in the park, and we ride right by all the bunkers that are there.
Sure.
Then there's a restaurant there outside Nashville in one of those bunkers in the airport. I think I've eaten there.
Yep. It's the B-52, isn't that what they call the restaurant? I think that's the name of it.
Yeah,
Congratulations.